Good evening, everyone. I welcome you all to the Progressive Student Forum's online lecture titled The Palestine Problem and the State of Israel. My name is Sara Bardhan, and I am a second year student of Urban Policy and Governance at TISS Mumbai and the Vice President of Progressive Students Forum at TISS. Today's lecture is especially important. Occupied territories, two-state solution, apartheid, proscribed terrorist organizations, the Nakba, Balfour Declaration, proxy militias. These are phrases that have captured the world's imagination once again. Perhaps one of the longest running conflicts of the world, the crisis that grips Palestine and Israel has a tangled history which has been described as intractable, complicated, and even deadlocked by Western media, academics, and media outlets. But as the conflict continues to evolve, massacre thousands, displace innocents, occupy land, and as students and academics, it becomes all the more important for us to unpack these complicated and entangled histories, so to say. And who better to do that than Dr. Vijay Prashad? Thank you so much for joining us, sir. It's an honor to hear from you. With that, I would like to welcome and introduce our chair for the evening, Comrade Ramdas, who is currently a PhD scholar at Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Mumbai, Central Executive Committee member of the Students Federation of India, and the Joint Secretary of SFI Maharashtra Committee. Apart from all of these designations, he has worked with PSF for the last very many years and is still guiding us whenever we need it. He is like a friend to a lot of us and whose work and leadership has always inspired us here as PSF TISS. Inviting you to chair the session, Comrade Ramdas.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you for your kind words. And I hope all of you are looking forward to have this lecture and especially listen from Vijay. Uh, First of all, we want to share our happiness of having Vijay Prashad again. I remember when I was coming to Mumbai for the first time in 2015-16, and in 16 July, one day in our college, we were having Vijay physically in our campus, and I remember that was the first time I was having a chance to listen to Dr. Vijay Prashad, and later different occasions we have had in different ways, and on PSF stage we had Vijay once again in 2021, but that was online and thank you Vijay for having agreed to be part of PSF and congratulations for PSF current leadership for organizing this. Before moving to the session, I would like to start with a few things. Why this session and a talk on Palestine issue is becoming important in terms of the students' perspective. I think I should draw that, I should flag that before our speakers start speaking. We have been knowing this issue and for the at least for the last 75 years or plus as a hot topic. More than that, the history is there more, but this is more important. And in these throughout this period, when you look at Indian campuses and the response from the student community and academia was different, and now we can see a shift from the previous positions that the student community was holding, which is very visible. Right now, we can see an open call for massacres from even from the student community, and that too even from very higher education spaces and in central universities or premier deemed universities or institute of national importance, where basically we think that the discussion and debates with more informations are being available. But this is very serious and this is a situation that as a student activist, as a student of human being, I see that this is very important. And looking at the current development, the recent developments, we can see a discussion is happening in Indian campuses, or a political propaganda is being spreaded uh, as a world, and the issue started since October 7th. There was no past existed before October 7th. So that is also something what becomes this issue is serious, and this talk and discussion becomes a basic necessity for us to have a conversation with someone who have been working or knowing these things. I think that is something which we can see right now. We can claim the Sangh Parivar forces that is being controlled in the government of India today is also being able to put up their political propaganda in universities in various ways, using power and as well as other propaganda materials also. So in this context, we have also seen the India's vote in UN that becomes not, surprisingly that, or from a shift from the previous positions we have taken as a country, that to abstain from uh, uh, the position. So taking a position, becoming abstaining, basically abstaining itself is a position that goes with the Israel. That is how we read as a research scholars or students. So within these contexts, we see that this issue is serious and we need to have a detailed conversation, and this is a serious intervention is what we see. And taking one of the example from the Tata Institute of Social Sciences, which I'm also a student and I'm aware of, and the organization is from that, we could see the moment students, different student organizations has naturally came out with their solidarity statements and positions on about what is happening in Gaza right now, and against the Israel's position. But the moment these reactions has come, there was a call for Muslim genocide is being happening even from the student community, from the very own university, which we are also coming, which is new to us also. I mean, I'm taking as one example. This is not this is not an isolated case. This is happening across, and the entire tagging of Hamas, mm, as putting Hamas and Hamas's one attack or whatever the developments had happened in October 7th as only at the center, and negating all other discussion. So within these contexts, we think I think this discussion becomes very important, especially for students in the social sciences institutes in India. And for that, this is a Herculean task that what I am being assigned to introduce our chair, Dr. Vijay. Definitely a task which I am not going to fulfill. I don't need to introduce Vijay to our speaker or other audience watching this. I just want to share this much only, that Vijay is someone whom we can get as a junior students as the best speaker for this session. And as an individual, I had started with saying that my first experience listening to Vijay was from a PSF program in Mumbai. That was on the station development, the station politics and conflicts only. He's speaking that day, and after maybe we can say 7 years, we are again with the same topic. We are again sitting. Let us see how you deal with that. And for the formality, I would like to just say a few words about Vijay as what Vijay is. Vijay is a historian and a journalist and executive director of the Tricontinental Institute of Social Research. And the inputs and the contribution that Tricontinental making is something what we all passionately look forward right now, and we are all students of the newsletters of Tricontinental these days, which I can clearly say. And I'm not elaborating too much. And first of all, thanking Vijay for joining us, and you have to moderate another session, which you are also being one of the organizers just after this session. So agreeing to us and joining with us is a very much inspiring for us. And over to you, Vijay. Would like to listen from you. Primarily, I think we have post shared. First, I think it will be good if you can draw a short introduction to what actually the conflict is. It a conflict or not? Israel. A short introduction to it. Secondly, what is the current developments is, what actually it is, and the political narrative of the same. The thirdly, I would like to listen from you that what is the international say, especially definitely as we are situated geographically situated in India, the current government of India's position also. If you can throw some light on these things also, it would be really good. Over to you. Thank you.
Well, Ramdas, it's great to be with you again. It's actually it hurts me to hear you say that on Indian campuses, students are now calling for the massacre. And the reason this hurts me is that I was a 15-year-old boy in Calcutta when I read about what happened in the Beirut neighborhoods of Sabra and Shatila in 1982, when the Israelis effectively manufactured a massacre of Palestinians. That event really hurt me. I was perplexed by it. Not that we haven't seen, by 1982 massacres in India, seen them, massacres against Dalits, massacres against Muslims. Soon we were going to see a terrible massacre in Assam, then against Sikhs and so on. It's not that India is somehow immune from this violence. But this particular violence in Beirut struck me. And I remember as a 15-year-old trying my best to read as much as possible about what was happening in West Asia. And since then, I've traveled a lot to Palestine. I used to live in Beirut in Lebanon, lived there about 10 years ago. I traveled to Gaza, to the West Bank, inside Israel, and so on. Um, and so I'm speaking a little bit from that. I'm also speaking from the fact that I have friends who are trapped now in Gaza, some near the Rafah crossing, unable to find a way to be safe. That's where I'm speaking from. And in a sense, I'm sad that on Indian campuses there is this attitude, because um, Indian students should know better than anybody that we have a history of struggle against imperialism, against colonialism. Our modern world in India was shaped by that struggle, and we should therefore have implicit solidarity with people who are fighting against colonial occupation. Okay, you've given me three tasks. Let me get through them. The first task: what is this? Is this a conflict? You see, Arabs of different kinds, Palestinians, um, Christian Palestinians, Muslim Palestinians, Jewish Palestinians have lived in that region between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea for a very long time. There was no real pogrom in that region. There was no violence. There was really no anti Semitism in that part of the world. Anti Semitism is a European phenomena. It was incubated in Europe. It had its worst period in Eastern Europe, in the pogroms against Jews in Tsarist Russia, in Poland, in Germany, and so on. That's where anti-Semitism had its root. Um, it is there that there was a so-called Jewish question, the Judenfrage. Can Jews be Jews and Germans? There was no question like that in Palestine. No Palestinian Christian or Palestinian Muslim said, can Palestinian Jews be Palestinian and Jews? That was not a question. There was no Judenfrage in Palestine. That was a question in Europe. Well, as a rise of Nazism, but before that, various forms of anti Semitic, fascistic forms in Europe began. Um, Ashkenazi Jews from Europe, through the assistance of the British Empire, began to enter Palestine and start buying property, escaping from the anti Semitism of Europe. And they brought, therefore, with them this settler colonial project to create a colony, a Jewish colony inside the Levant, inside Palestine, displacing not only Palestinian Christians and Palestinian Muslims, but also Palestinian Jews. Sephardic Jews were also displaced in this. Well, this, of course, created a problem, and people began to rise up. There was a rebellion in the 1930s of Palestinians against the British Empire's enforcement of settlers on their land. It's the Great Palestinian Revolt, about which the Palestinian intellectual Ghassan Kanafani wrote a terrific book on the Palestinian Revolt, which Leftword will publish probably later this year. Okay, then in 1948, just to jump forward, the British, in collusion with various others, allowed the now almost triumphant Jewish population that had come from Europe to establish a state of Israel in 1948. That state of Israel was established the same year as the UN established the Declaration of Human Rights. On the other hand, there was no human rights in what happened. The Lebanese historian Konstantin Zurayak calls it the Nakba, the catastrophe. Palestinians were by gun removed from their homes. They were pushed out of historic Palestine and put into refugee camps in Gaza, in the West Bank, sent over into Lebanon, into Jordan, and so on, never to see their homes again. This is called the Nakba. Well, as a consequence of this, United Nations passed a series of resolutions, including Resolution 194, which allows Palestinians the right to return because this Nakba was contrary to international law. Can't just ethnically cleanse a territory. That is the original sin. The entire problem starts in this period of 1930s to 1948, and then the Nakba. That's where it begins. The forcible expulsion of Palestinians from their land, the making of them into permanent refugees. Why do I begin there? Because you can't begin on October 7th. If you don't begin there, you don't understand anything. And after 1948, the next great conflict was in 1967 when the Israeli government seized the three regions of the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza, which had been constituted by the UN as the Palestinian territory and now was the occupied Palestinian territory. So Israel actually formally from 1967 had obligations to those whom it occupied, and those whom it occupied have the right to resist. That's actually fundamentally enshrined in international law. Occupied people have the right to resist. You know, when people say Israel has a right to defend itself, actually it doesn't have the right to defend itself, not against those who it's occupied. It has obligations to treat them with care, not to violate the Geneva Conventions. And the people who are occupied have the right to resist. So it's an upside down world in the discourse around right to defend itself. You don't have the right to defend yourself if you're occupying people. If another country attacks Israel, if Egypt attacked Israel, then Israel has a right as a member state of the United Nations to defend itself, but not against people it is occupying. It's an important distinction that I think is completely forgotten or lost or deliberately hidden from public view, particularly by governments that want to, in some ways, curry favor with the United States, Israel, and so on. Okay, now, having established that this land is occupied and having seen resistance from the Palestinians, most spectacularly in the first Intifada of 1987, when young people rose up across Palestine. And it's during the Intifada that the Islamic resistance movement was created, that is to say, Hamas. It was created in 1987. I mean, Hamas was not there in 1948. It was not there in the 1930s. It was only created in 1987. It's only 35 years old, in fact. It's not that old. The Palestinian issue is not Hamas. Hamas is a young force in this. There's a long history of fighting for liberation. Hamas is only part of it. Even now, it's only a part of it. There are other factions involved that are fighting for liberation. Okay, so after the Intifada, the Israelis and the United States put a lot of pressure on the Palestinian Authority, Palestinian Liberation Organization, at the time sitting in Tunis, led by Yasser Arafat. When the Soviet Union collapses in 1991, Arafat essentially feels that the Palestinians no longer have any support in the world. It's a unipolar system. United States is the single master. Got to do what they say, otherwise they'll allow the Palestinians to be wiped out in a second Nakba. Well, here's the issue. They construct something called the Oslo Accords, which actually, when you look at it, was always intended to fail. It took this Swiss cheese of the West Bank, East Jerusalem, Gaza, and said that the Palestinians will have this as their Palestinian state, and there'll be safe passage from the West Bank and Gaza, that the land established for Palestine will be theirs, and so on. All of this was the next day torn up. There was no safe passage allowed between Gaza and the West Bank and East Jerusalem. The Israelis began to build walls around the West Bank. There were checkpoints everywhere. They began to build settlements in the West Bank, taking away the land that was supposed to be this tiny plot of land, supposed to be the new Palestinian state. The Israelis violated the Oslo Accords. No wonder, therefore, there's great frustration in the ranks of the Palestinian, the attempt to fight back, and so on. In other words, what I'm saying is the two-state solution was destroyed the day after the Oslo Accords were signed. The Israelis destroyed it by the annulling of safe passage. The Israelis destroyed it by the settlement project inside the West Bank. The Israelis destroyed it by encroaching and taking over East Jerusalem. The Israelis destroyed it by building the apartheid wall around the West Bank. And the Israelis destroyed it by punctually, after 2005, bombing Gaza. Operation Cast Lead, Operation Permanent Resolve, and now this brutal genocidal campaign that they have launched. The two-state solution was killed. It doesn't exist anymore. It is now merely rhetoric. What are the options? Well, there's always the one-state solution, one state which is secular, democratic, and so on. This state is absolutely out of the question as far as the Zionist ruling class is concerned in Israel. They are committed to an ethno-religious state, the Jewish state. They will not permit Palestinians to have full citizenship. They don't have full citizenship now. They will not permit the right of return. They will not permit the Jewish population to become less than a complete majority. Jews from anywhere in the world can go to Israel and get citizenship, but Palestinians who have a right to return enshrined by UN Security Council Resolution 194, they don't have the right to enter. They cannot. So the one-state solution, which is actually a humane solution, it's a solution which would create a secular democratic republic, which includes Palestinians, Muslims, Palestinian Christians, and Jews. It makes for one kind of solution that is out of the question as far as the Israeli ruling elite is concerned. So you don't have a two-state solution. You don't have a one-state solution. Well, the Israeli ruling class wants a three-state solution. What they want is Nakba Part 2. What they want is to remove the Palestinians to the three states of Lebanon, Jordan, and Egypt. That's their three-state solution. They want to remove the Palestinians from Gaza into the Sinai Desert in Egypt, and they want Gaza to be essentially Israeli land. They want to take it over. Contravention of every single Geneva Convention, starting with collective punishment all the way out to population transfer. These are all crimes in international law, but that's precisely what they want to do. They want to cleanse greater Israel of Palestinians, or let Palestinians remain as long as they are second-class citizens. This is entirely inappropriate and it's impossible. In 1960, United Nations passed a resolution which said that the process of liberation is both irresistible and irreversible. Okay, this is a UN resolution, probably one of the most poetic UN resolutions around. It's a resolution on colonialism. The process of liberation is irresistible and irreversible. It's irresistible. You can't stop people from wanting to be free. It's not possible. People will not allow themselves to be second-class citizens. It's not possible. And secondly, it's irreversible. Secondly, it's not going to, you can't prevent it. I mean, one is you can't get rid of that urge that people have. And secondly, it's going to happen. Now, you have to come to terms with it. Well, the Israeli ruling class as constituted now is not going to come to terms with it. So I'm sorry to say this is going to be a terrible, terrible struggle, a difficult struggle. Changes have to come in Israel, nowhere else. That society needs to come to terms with the fact it's never going to get security by war, by killing more people, 10,000, 20,000. I'm going to come to this conflict in a second, this particular episode in a second. But I just want to make the point. There is no solution through warfare here unless you exterminate every one of the millions of Palestinians that live in proximity to historical Palestine. You can't do it. You just can't. And look, this war is already creating contradictions that will go against Israel. For instance, Jordan is an enormous country of Palestinians. There are more Palestinians in Jordan than in most other countries. The Jordanian Queen Rania, is herself Palestinian. She was on television recently, very strong statements about the occupation of Palestinians, the need for liberation, and so on. Jordan and Egypt have peace agreements with Israel, the first to normalize. Jordan has recently expelled the Israeli ambassador, sent the ambassador back to Tel Aviv. That's a big move for Jordan. The next thing we'll probably see is King Abdullah II say that the peace agreement is under threat, that we may not honor the peace agreement. In 1948, during the Nakba, the Egyptian military was humiliated. They felt that their king, King Farouk, had not armed them well enough. They were not able to fight the Israelis. And out of that humiliation came the Free Officers' coup led by Gamal Abdul Nasser, overthrew the king, created a republic. President Sisi of Egypt today knows that history very well. He understands that right now the Egyptian military is feeling humiliated. They are sitting there with their fantastic armaments, unable to do anything because the United States and Saudi Arabia put the lid on Sisi. Sisi can't even make the argument for a no-fly zone over Gaza, which the Egyptians could easily impose. Easily. They have an air base within 45 minutes flying time of Gaza. They could easily impose a no-fly zone on top of Gaza, prevent the Israelis from bombing. There's not even been an Egyptian Air Force jet that's flown near Rafah. The Israelis have bombed Egyptian territory. They've 3 times bombed the Rafah crossing, and Egypt hasn't done anything. They're just sitting there humiliated. The Arab world is very, very angry. Yesterday, Syed Hassan Nasrallah of Hezbollah in Lebanon gave a very interesting speech where he warned the Israelis and he warned the United States, saying Hezbollah's 100,000 fighters are prepared to enter the contest here. That US ships in the Mediterranean, 72 of them, warships, they cannot protect themselves against Hezbollah's rockets. Hezbollah will fire into Israel and so on. Nasrallah said already that there are small skirmishes in southern Lebanon against Israel, and that has pinned down a quarter of the Israeli army, has been pinned down sitting in the north, waiting for Hezbollah to act. We're at a very tough point. Just few hours ago, the Israelis again bombed Al Shifa Hospital. They bombed 2 ambulance convoys, saying that there were Hamas militants. All photographs show that there were injured people in there. Don't look like Hamas at all. It's a tough situation. I mean, there's no easy exit here. And it's shameful that the Indian government has gone the way it's gone. It's shameful. It's not surprising. India normalized relations with Israel in 1992 under the Congress government, basically to curry favor with the United States. A senior diplomat told me when I was writing my book, Namaste Sharon, he said that the road to Washington has to go through Tel Aviv. We have to make nice with the Israelis. Then the US will talk to us. Well, now it's even worse. I mean, the current government, shares a great deal of worldview with the right-wing government in Israel. It's shameful that the Indian people, 1.4 billion of them, are sitting back and watching this genocide happen before our eyes. There have been some demonstrations in India, but not enough, not near enough public anger. Where are the parties apart from the left? The left has made strong statements. Where are the other parties? Where is the India coalition? Priyanka Gandhi made a very important statement on Twitter, but where is her party? Why aren't they also on the streets? A genocide is taking place before our eyes. Yasser Arafat used to say Indira Gandhi was my sister. Where are you now, Gandhi family? Your brother's people are in distress and you are not doing anything. That's where we are. It's a tough situation. I don't want to just make noises at the end saying things will be easy and so on. Leftword Books has just published a book by Haider Eid, who is a professor at Al-Aqsa University in Gaza City. I've been talking to Heather this last 4 weeks as he and his two young daughters, his wife, have moved from Gaza City down below Salahuddin Street, which divides Gaza into two, down to Khan Yunis, and now he's near Rafah City, hoping to get across the border to Egypt. All he's worried about are the lives of his two daughters. Meanwhile, other friends have been killed in this conflict already, in the bombing. One, a cameraman that I worked with at Al Jazeera, killed already. This is the world we live in. Brutal, brutal attack. I just want to end here and say that in these 4 weeks, 10,000 civilians have been killed in Palestine. That's more than the number of people killed in Ukraine. Within weeks after allegations came out that the Russian government had moved children from the war zone to Russia, okay, because the war zone was dangerous, Vladimir Putin was slapped with an ICC warrant, International Criminal Court warrant, for moving children, for safe passage for them. For moving children, the International Criminal Court slapped him with a warrant. Mr. Netanyahu is responsible for the murder of 5,000 Palestinian children. There is not even a whiff of a warrant against him. If this is the international community, it is not only broken, it doesn't exist as such. It's brutal, it's hypocritical, and it's taking us to the brink of greater regional conflicts, which I hope don't happen. Thanks a lot. See, Ramdas, I just thought it's better people ask questions. I think I've downloaded a lot of my thoughts and feelings, but let's get some questions in, okay?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Vijay, for quickly drawing whatever we have asked. So yeah, you have given an introduction to the three things which I was asking you to comment on. Thank you for the same. And I think something which I wanted to ask from my end. So you just touched at the end of that also. What is the future? So you're saying that what is actually going to happen in the next few months? If do you expect some international intervention on this by other countries? We have seen some of the comments when Iran was almost attacked. A comment from China, that a strong comment. Can we expect something like that? And so then the situation becoming changing. Or if we go back to history, something like that from Soviet Union, some response to Israel. And so can we expect something similar that changes the situation right now, or what is your take on that?
In 2015, when it looked like, actually this started in 2014, when it looked like the United States was going to bomb Damascus. It was a pretty tense period. I was in Beirut at the time, and there was a real fear that the US was going to launch missile strikes on Damascus, in the same way that they attacked Iraq in 2003. At the time, Obama held back. There was some pressure from the Russians. And then months later, Russian military aircraft landed in Damascus airport. And when the Russians entered Damascus airport, that was the end of the possibility of the attack. With the Russians there, it would have been very complicated to directly attack Syria, because then the United States and Russia would be at war with each other. That kind of thing, interesting. You see, firstly, Gaza doesn't have an airport. So you can't fly in, planes, Chinese military aircraft or Russian military aircraft. You can't fly in the Russian military aircraft. I mean, what is going to happen? What I would say is, if Russia wasn't pinned down right now in Ukraine, it would be interesting to have a Russian naval battalion, naval carrier group, leave Sevastopol, go through the Bosphorus, go past Istanbul, enter the Eastern Mediterranean, and sit beside the US ships. That would be an interesting show of force. But that's not going to stop the Israelis. The only thing that might stop the Israelis right now is if Jordan and Egypt tear up their peace agreements, and if the Egyptian army starts to mass at the Rafah crossing, in fact, enters Gaza to create a humanitarian corridor, goes up to Saladin Street, maybe, if the Egyptians had the guts for that. But the Egyptian army is a humiliated army. It spends billions of dollars on its armaments, doesn't use them ever. In this case, it's a humiliated army. It used to be the great Arab army. What's the point of having such a big army if it's not willing to go and defend civilians? India has a uncomfortable history with its own military, okay? But I was a young kid in Calcutta when the Indian army entered East Pakistan to prevent the genocide of the Bengali peoples of Pakistan, later the Bangladeshis. That was a very important intervention by the Indian military. When the Vietnamese military entered Cambodia to prevent the genocide that was being driven by the Khmer Rouge, that was an important intervention. All military interventions are not bad. We have examples of important, serious military interventions to prevent genocide. The entry of Vietnamese troops into Cambodia prevented the further killing of Cambodians. The entry of Indian troops into Dhaka prevented the killing further of Bengali peoples of Pakistan and then the founding of Bangladesh. These are important interventions. Why can't the Egyptian military cross Rafah, open a humanitarian corridor, protect civilians? The Israelis are continuing to bomb near Saladin Street, the south, access roads and so on. Why doesn't the military send tanks up the two main roads in Gaza to create a safe corridor, protect ambulances, things like that? Why not? They're a humiliated army. That's what I'm saying. You can't expect the Chinese to send military forces or the Iranians. They're not going to do it. Hezbollah can't walk down Israel. It's not possible. Hezbollah is pinning 1/4 of the Israeli army down in the north. The Jordanians and the Israeli and the Egyptians, with their peace agreement, are facilitating the continuation of the genocide. At the very least, they should tear up the peace agreements. At the very least, Jordanian troops should come near Allenby Bridge and say that if you continue to kill people in the West Bank, we're crossing the border. We're coming in to save the people. We're not coming to fight against the Israelis. We're coming to save the people. Why not? There is precedent for that. That worked. Okay? Bangladesh, Cambodia, these are precedents that worked. And let me say, these are two armies of the third world that moved. Western armies are not great at saving lives. I don't see very many examples of Western armies saving lives. Yeah.
I think there was one question that what's it? Related to this, Raghav Gupta has asked. Can you please tell us more about Egyptian and Jordanian peace accords with Israel? And somewhat you have just started. If you want to add a little more, will be good.
Yeah, I mean, look, these accords were part of the 1970s process of basically normalization that starts then. Anwar al-Sadat was the one with Jimmy Carter's blessing who initiate this process. Also, King Abdullah II's father, King Abdullah I. I mean, why did they do this? One, the Israeli army defeated the Arab armies in 1973, and it looked like the military strategy of 1948, 56, 67, 73, the military strategy was not working. So these governments, under immense pressure from the United States and also advantage to their own countries, Egypt then gets an enormous arms agreement with the United States. Egypt becomes a subsidiary power of the US in that region. Jordan is basically a subsidiary power of the United States in the region. They get a lot of benefits for this. So they sign the peace agreement. But these agreements have been nothing. They've done nothing for the Palestinians. And it's humiliating, as I've used that word a lot. Jordan, which is a monarchy with a large Palestinian population. For God's sake, your own subjects have families that are being brutalized, and you're sitting there with a peace agreement, so that Israeli tourists can come and see Petra, so you can get the tourist money, and you can get good handshake with the United States every once in a while. It's pathetic, actually. That peace agreement was pathetic.
Thank you, Vijay. I'll club two questions together and share with you. I mean, we have a long list of questions. We'll take some of the questions considering time and just quickly club two questions. One, Gautam is asking, could you explain a little more on the creation of Hamas and Israel's role in it? Not exactly same, but I think maybe you can elaborate a little more on the coming one another question. And another section is asking, how do we understand Mr. Netanyahu's agenda, his declining popularity and mounting home state protests, and his relationship to Hamas? Maybe if you can address these questions.
Yeah, I mean, look, Hamas was created in 1987. It's the Islamic resistance movement. There has always been a great suspicion that it was egged on by the Israeli military at the time as a way to undercut the more secular Palestinian factions, in the Palestinian Liberation Organization. That means Al Fatah, led by Yasser Arafat, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine, the Palestinian Communist Party, now called the Palestinian People's Party. That these secular groups had hegemony over Palestinian society, and somehow the Israeli military and ruling elites colluded to build up Hamas. That's probably, there's some truth to it, I think. But also, let's be clear that this is a period in the 80s when there's a revival of religious politics one way or the other, including in India. The rise of the absolutely moribund Bharatiya Jan Sangh is revived suddenly as the Bharatiya Janata Party. Okay, when it was the Bharatiya Jan Sangh, they couldn't even win any seats in parliament. But in the 80s there was a revival of religious politics in India. This happens all over the world, in Turkey as well. You see the beginning of the peace and justice and development movement, which leads to Erdogan. Now, there's actually a connection between the peace and development movement of justice and development movement of Erdogan and Hamas, because they are both offshoots of the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood, the Ikhwani Muslimi, is from a long history in Egypt, incubated fascinatingly in Saudi Arabia. Why? Because in Egypt, when Nasser cracks down on the Muslim Brotherhood, all these fellows rush off to become engineers and teachers in Saudi Arabia. The Saudis hated the Brotherhood and still hate the Brotherhood. But they tolerated these chaps because they all came with, engineering, teaching, medical backgrounds. Because the Muslim Brotherhood is big on professional people. It's a big professional, thing. And so it's from the Muslim Brotherhood that Hamas, Erdogan's party, and so on start to grow and become, they're funded by the Qataris, which is heavily influenced by the Muslim Brotherhood as well, and so on. So, I mean, I know that the Israelis played a role. I know that's true. But I don't want to make Hamas just like a creation of the Israelis. They played a role, they egged it on. But it also emerges in this period when religious politics around the world is having a return, and also when the Muslim Brotherhood is having a return. Okay, Netanyahu. Netanyahu is basically a child of Ariel Sharon. Ariel Sharon was the general in the Israeli military forces, and he played a major role after Likud, his party, the right-wing party, wins the election in 1977. You see, at the same time as the Jordanians and Egyptians are signing peace agreements with Israel, Israel places a general, General Ariel Sharon, to lead the agriculture ministry. Why, what is a general doing at the agriculture ministry, you might ask? Well, in the agriculture ministry, Sharon ran the project of settlements, of settling um, Jewish migrants from other parts of the world into lands which the Palestinians had held. And so it's not the Ministry of Agriculture; it's the Ministry of Settler Colonialism, and they incubate this idea of greater Israel. It's a big idea that goes from the Jordan River all the way to the Mediterranean Sea, around the Niqab Desert, the Negev, up into what is today Gaza, and so on. Netanyahu comes from that political tradition. His agenda is essentially that the Palestinians must leave, and if they stay, they are second class citizens. That's his agenda. And I'm not even sure about declining popularity. I'm not sure about that. He has a base among the right. He has a strong base. And this war is going to half strengthen his power with his base, and the liberals are going to cry unfair. But he's done something smart. Beginning of the war, Netanyahu brought opposition leader Benny Gantz into his government, created a government of national unity. Everybody, the entire Israeli political class, is responsible for what happens. That was a clever move. He's a smart guy, Netanyahu. He's not a dummy.
I will move to the next question. Alps is asking, do you think the role of Vanguard Party is getting diluted in modern decolonization efforts? Your inputs on involvement of PFLP and DFLP.
So the first thing is the PFLP and the DFLP, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, Democratic Front. They have bases mainly in the West Bank, and in the refugee colonies, refugee camps in Jordan and Lebanon and so on. They have been largely, but not entirely, wiped out of Gaza. They don't really have a big base in Gaza. Interestingly, the Israelis keep arresting the political leadership of the PFLP and the DFLP. I mean, the PFLP Politburo is sitting in as political prisoners in Israeli jails. Um, Israel understands the threat that they pose. Okay, very much understands the threat that they pose. These factions aren't they're not completely moribund. Okay, they are not dead. They are alive and well. It's just that Israel has targeted them, in a very clever way, and continues to do so. Now, the role of the vanguard party is always going to be important, okay? Because vanguard parties shape political struggles. Mass struggles take place, but they can go anywhere. I mean, look at the Arab Spring. It is a great example. You had massive demonstrations. You had people sitting in Tahrir Square for a long time, but then they dissipated because there was no agenda, no force that was there to give leadership and content. Um, Vanguard parties will always play a role. I've for decades seen the obituary written for vanguard parties. Um, without the role of vanguard parties, I'm not sure the farmers' protest in India would have been as precise, and therefore as powerful. It the vanguard forces were able to take the genuine demands of the farmers and articulate them in a precise set of demands. Very clever set of demands. So they will always be valuable. The question isn't vanguard party. The question is the Israelis have been targeting them, and there's very little solidarity for them. If I named 4 or 5 of the PFLP leaders who are in jail, you don't know their names. For the last 10 years, we haven't been calling for their release. They have been forgotten by the world. They have not been forgotten by the people in the West Bank, but we are not doing enough in solidarity with those left forces inside Palestine. Let me say, as a person of the left, we are just not doing enough solidarity. You know, I mean, I was, you know, like, I mean, I remember in 2019. Okay, I'll give you just an example. One go, the Israelis entered the West Bank and arrested 50 PFLP leaders. December 2019, wham! They just went and grabbed them, and there was barely any, mention of it. There was some discussion of Khalida Jarrar, who keeps going in and out of jail. She is a PFLP leader. Um, her situation gets some press, but not enough. Yeah.
Since you have mentioned, let's just to give a sub question to it. That what is the actual strength of the left in Israel? We can see some of the statements from the Israeli Communist Party and all. So and other left forces who are there in the Israel within Israel. What is their strength? So we could see their position on this issue, but what is their strength and what is their role in the civil society?
The last time I was in Israel, I met some people from the various left and 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 Palestinian political organizations in Israel. Some of them are members of the MK. They have seats in the Knesset. Um, I mean, it's weak. Okay, it's very weak. Um, very weak. There were demonstrations the other day. Israelis trying to break into a hostel in a college to attack Palestinian students. Um, it's weak. Let's not exaggerate it. I mean, you don't like to say it because you don't want your comrades and friends in Israel to feel demoralized because people outside are saying, "Well, you're so weak," But it's a factual thing. They are weak. They're not able to drive an agenda. The trade unions are non-existent on this issue. Zionism is swept through the working class in Israel. And there are advantages. You get advantages against the Palestinians. You get the settlements are wonderful. They are modern neighborhoods, and that's the danger of that form of race society, is that a race society undercuts class politics. I mean, you already see that dynamic in India, which is such a large country, that the lower middle class Hindu populations see the advantages to them, minor as they might be, of having an anti-Muslim attitude, minor as they may be. The common class agenda is very hard to establish when a race state starts to being built. And both in Israel and in India, a race state is being built. And that's dangerous. It's ugly. It's ugly. It's an ugly thing to live in. A race state is just ugly. I'm finding a lot of things happening in India ugly. Just inhumane, and it's so brutal in its execution. Okay, the arrest of journalists and so on. It's ugly. What you can't even make an argument. I listened to Kapil Sibal give a talk yesterday. I think I was listening to him talk yesterday. Outstanding lecture he gave, where he just said that, now in India you can be arrested for no reason. You'll get no bail. That's ugly. That's an ugly situation. What's the point of having a constitution if you're building a race state? Because race states are always authoritarian. Let's be frank. Because they don't provide for minority rights. The rights agenda gets diluted, and the strong fist takes over. And Israel is becoming a race state more and more.
I'd like two questions together right now. One is by Ved Mukherjee. Russia and China are the two-state solution for this conflict. UN representatives said strongly for Palestine. Can these countries do more? One. Uh, Related to this, one more question we can take. Uh, yeah, this is Sri Lakshmi asking, how is it possible to reconcile the establishment of Israel, yeah, formed as a result of the settler colonialism, with the idea of two-state solution without endorsing colonialism and the rights of displaced? I would like to add more on this, that this two-state solution is something right now everybody endorsing. We could see all the organizations are also endorsing it. So can you club all these things and comment on?
I mean, the two-state solution is a myth. It's a mirage. It doesn't exist. Okay, it's the UN standard. That's why everybody has to endorse it. It's endorsed by the United Nations. Everybody, look, Israel right now is violating all UN resolutions. Why should member states of the UN continue to insist on the two-state solution because it's the UN standard? It's ridiculous. It's completely a mirage. You can't build. There is no two-state right now, and um, you can't build a two-state in the future. You really can't. Um, you understand? It's just not possible to have a two-state. Um, yeah, I mean, it, it just doesn't exist. Is all I can say. Yeah.
Yeah, we have a huge list of questions. I'm just being confused which to take. I'm just taking one of the questions in front of me. This is from Gaurav Gade. In major cities in the West, at least in UK, where I am listening from, there have been huge weekly protests with increasing numbers every week. Will it put any pressure on governments in the West? Will it? What do
Well,
you think?
um, yeah. So look, a million people marched to prevent the United in New York City to prevent the United States from going to war against Iraq. Remember, you may remember this, 2003. A million people didn't have an impact. They went to war anyway.
Uh,
Um,
Vijay, sorry for
yeah.
interrupting. I think I can take one more thing and comment on. So
Okay.
it may make you a little worried. Parents are asking, how can true pressure be built to truly reach a resolution beyond ceasefire? Plus, one more thing, we could see few countries are calling back their ambassadors and diplomats from Israel and sending Israel diplomats from their country also. Maybe I think these can also be added to these questions.
I mean, um, yeah. So it is true that in the United States right now, today there will be 100,000 more people in Washington, D.C. at a rally. I'm going to speak at it. I flew in here last night to speak at this rally in just near the White House, um, you know, outside my window. Um, Maybe a couple of 100,000 people will march here. Um, Biden is feeling the pressure. Right now, two or three U.S. senators have talked about how they have to talk about um, their own constituency. People are upset, blah blah blah. Uh, it's not that there's like no pressure on these politicians, but the issue is you can uplift the pressure. Look at England. I mean, Keir Starmer of the Labour Party, uh, he has refused to call for a ceasefire, despite the fact that there was a giant protest in England. What are they afraid of? These politicians. In the United States, 66% of the public wants a ceasefire. That's if you're going just by the polls, you should follow that, right? You don't need a demonstration. Okay. Um, you got 66 polling that they want a ceasefire. Why don't you just have a ceasefire? It's not happening. Why? What are they afraid of? I mean, some of this is raw power politics. Um, this is the West's struggle against Iran, and their fantasies about controlling the Middle East and putting Saudi Arabia in its place and so on. That whole thing has come undone. This belief, for instance, that Saudi Arabia will normalize relations with Israel, very difficult for it to happen now. That corridor, remember the G20 from India to Saudi Arabia going through Israel to Europe, that's finished. Saudis won't accept a corridor that goes through Israel right now. So there should be pressure to calm things down. Why aren't they leaning on the Israelis? Why is the United States not only not leaning on the Israelis, but providing $15 billion of aid? Why? Don't ask me that question. That's a question to ask these leaders. Somebody who asked the question said, I'm in the UK, right? Ask even Keir Starmer, he's the opposition. Why isn't he calling for a ceasefire? Still this nonsensical humanitarian pause. What are they so afraid of? In England, there's a climate that if you don't stand with Israel, you are an anti-Semite. Is that what they're afraid of? Surely it can't just be that. What are they afraid of? I can't answer that question. I'm not the one afraid. They're afraid. They need to answer the question. You're asking me a question where I'm to speculate on their lack of courage or their psychological worldview, or their political calculations. I simply cannot understand their political calculations. That's what I'm trying to say. In the United States, 66% of the population is asking for a ceasefire. And yet you are sending $15 billion of weaponry to Israel. What's the political calculation?
Next question is here. Can you throw some light on the relation of the current apartheid of Israel with the resources in Gaza?
Well, I mean, there are all kinds of stories that come and go. Like, for instance, the big gas field off the shore of Gaza. I don't think the United States needs to. I mean, the Israelis need to get rid of the Palestinians from Gaza to claim the natural gas. They control the water anyway. They control everything up to the beaches of Gaza. When fisher folk leave with their boats from the small ports in Gaza, they often get harassed by Israeli boats, military boats, sending them back. So all these stories about, they want Gaza for the gas and so on, it's not necessarily true because they already control all that. I mean, there is, let's face it, a great sense of hatred of Palestinians inside Israeli society. And there's a belief that getting rid of Palestinians will improve the security situation. In other words, ethnic cleansing will increase your security. This is a strange idea, you think if you moved the Palestinians to Egypt, they wouldn't still try to come in and get their lands back? That they would suddenly say, okay, fine, we give up our land? There's a difference, let's say, between the Indian story and the Palestinian story. In India, when partition happened, 13 million people crossed on either side, right? Leaving their ancestral homes and so on. Why didn't they clamor to go back? Why didn't, like my family that came from Lahore, why didn't my family say, we want to go back? Here's the key to our house. Why did we just say, forget it, now we'll build a new life? Partly it's because one was told at the time that this is it. You're going to go there, they're going to be here, and it's a partition. The Palestinians were not. They were forcibly removed from their homes. They didn't agree to any partition. I'm not saying that people in India and Pakistan agreed to the partition, but they conceded to it. They said, okay, I'll get land on the other side. I'll give up a house in Lahore, I'll get a house in Delhi. I'll give up. So the governments on both ends facilitated the refugees. Um, there was never a sense that this was a temporary thing or that you were being forced out. You were being forced out for sure, but you knew that at the other end there'll be something for you. It's a more complicated story. In this case, people were just ripped from their homes and thrown out and told to sit in the desert in tents, and disappear. It was ruthless and brutal, and that's the price that um, the region has paid since 1948. People always ask, why do you start in 1948? Why not, when Jesus was there? Netanyahu gave an interview some years ago where he said, look, we have always been here. Jesus was a Jewish rabbi. That's true, but at the same time, there were um, all kinds of other peoples there that were not Jews, in that part of the world. And later, Christians were there, and then later yet, Muslims were there, and they created a society together that was not perfect, but it was not ruthless. Um, so you can't go back to like the ancient world, because then you go back to the pre-Judaic peoples and say, well, everybody should leave. By that logic, the Europeans should leave the United States, go back to England or wherever, Italy, and give it to the original people. That's the logic of Netanyahu. It's a ridiculous logic. It's a ridiculous logic. Indigeneity of that kind is not sustainable, because it's like you keep going back and there's always somebody there before you. The question is, when was there a time when people could live together? And that was hundreds of years, right before the 1930s. Yeah.
Okay, can we have the next question? I just before taking this question, I just want to comment on that. I have strict direction from the organizers that not to take many questions, and let us wind up with the last question. So apologize to all the people who have commented. Taking a question from that is a huge task, and just going to the question.
No, it's
How
my
do you?
fault. I would like to say you shouldn't apologize. It's my fault, because I think generally people speak longer and take fewer questions. I ruined the whole thing by speaking shorter in order to take more questions, which made your work harder. So sorry about that.
There is plenty of questions here. How do you compare the Indian media's portrayal of the conflict with that of the international media such as Al Jazeera, BBC, or the Guardian? Hardik Kumbi is asking. I just want to add as an extension to it that whichever the media that us maybe we can let us take us the students, this is that all from India. Uh, whichever the media whom we should trust to follow to know what actually is happening. We could see some of the on October 7th, 9th, and during that days, there was a lot of fake news coming out, and that became reported as the uh, prime news here across the globe also. So I would like to add that also. What would you suggest?
Well, there is no doubt that the Arab journalists, mainly Palestinian journalists, are on the ground in Gaza. Most of the other journalists have left. That means that in the English language, it's basically Al Jazeera, which is covering from the ground. To some extent, Telesur English is covering from the ground. Um, most of the other English news channels are covering from outside, from Jerusalem, from Rafah, from Tel Aviv, and so on. So I am not obsessively watching it, but I watch Al Jazeera when I get an opportunity. I think it's probably got the best people on the ground, and that's important. Okay, Indian news. I haven't watched a lot of Indian news. I watched a lot of the South American channels. I watched some of the African channels and so on. But I did watch a few of the Indian talk shows. Um, and I mean, there's more coverage of the World Cup, it seems to me, um, than of what's happening in Gaza. And I I feel like Indian reporters, like many Western reporters, are they seem to be struggling to tell the story. Either the owners aren't letting the story come out, or they are afraid of the government or whatever. But there's a lack of moral clarity. I was reading the Financial Times. I want to share this with you. This is actually a good. Well, I can remember what it was in the Financial Times today. There's an article where the reporter says that aid is not coming into Gaza. Okay. Uh, Now, that's clear. Everybody knows that. There's 2 points where the reporter very cleverly is critical of the Israeli government. One says that since October 8th, 360 trucks of aid have entered Gaza. Last line of the sentence: before this conflict, 400 trucks a day used to enter. Next paragraph: the Israelis are thinking of opening a sea corridor so that humanitarian goods can come to Cyprus, be checked by the Israelis, and then come to a small port outside Gaza City. Full stop. Last sentence of the paragraph: Israel has bombed that port. So, very cleverly, this reporter has been able to inject criticism in a very subtle way, you know, saying that, well, what kind of aid what kind of plan are you proposing? You just bomb the port. But they can't do a headline that says that Israel is starving the population. You understand? Something is holding them back. Is it the owners? Is it their governments? I don't know. But the reporters for sure are feeling terrible. And you can sense it in the stories. If you do a close reading of the stories, you can sense that any sensitive reporter reporting this story, 4 or 5,000 children killed, babies killed, very hard to not be affected by it. And if you've been to Gaza and you know how people live, I'll tell you something about Gaza and then maybe I'll leave you with this, okay? I mean, I've traveled to a lot of places to cover conflicts and different things and struggles and whatever. In Gaza, I have never felt scared. I've never worried about like somebody lift my wallet or take my phone, nothing. It's an incredibly hospitable environment. And it's this environment that's getting devastated. And that's why anybody who's been there, reported from there, can tell you with sincere feeling that it feels terrible to watch what's going on. So I can see it in a lot of the international coverage that reporters who have been there know what it's like. And so they write, Israel has bombed that port as a way to tell the reader, listen, listen to what I'm saying. I'm whispering something to you. Please pick it up because my editor won't allow me to say it in a more blunt way. So I can't say much about the Indian media's coverage, but what I've seen has been rather pathetic. Really pathetic. And that's a shame. And it's a reflection in general of the Indian mainstream media. Um, it's downhill all the way. Sorry to say that. I work for a lot of the Indian press. And, yeah.
Thank you, Vijay. Before you leave us, I just want to ask you one more thing, and that what students should be reading or to get in-depth analysis of what is the issue actually regarding the historic perspective and other narratives. Can you suggest some good reads also? It will be really good.
Well, I would really like people to get the new book by Heather Eid, which Leftword is going to have. It's already on our website. It'll be shipped in about a week. It's called Decolonizing the Palestinian Mind. And it's a fantastic argument against the Oslo Accords. Very quick read, 100 and some pages. Heather Reed, as I said, teaches in Al-Aqsa University in Gaza. Is quite a tremendous person, teaches literature. He's sitting at the Rafah crossing, and in fact, sent me the forward of the book as a bunch of audio notes while the bombing was happening. And when I sent him the cover of the book, he wrote and said, right now above my head, there are F-16s and drones. But he said, I can't hear them for a minute because I'm so happy to see this cover. So have a read of his book. It's powerful.
Thank you, Vijay, for joining us. And I'm asked to wind up the session. And I'd like to thank, on a personal level, I would like to thank Vijay on joining us today and giving this detailed, what I would say, an interaction. And as a chair, I would like to apologize once again to all the people who are asking questions, still asking questions. Some of the questions are coming to some of your replies and all. We may address that later or in some other occasion. And uh, as an individual, as a student, as an activist, as a human being, uh, let us all stand united for Palestine. Let us hope that Palestine will be free from the river to the sea one day. Let us hope and work towards whatever in our capacity to do so, to see that in our own lifetime itself. And thank you for that. And I'd like to hand over the session, the control to Rashmi Marwada, who is the Vice President of the elected Student Union of Tata Institute of Social Sciences, as well as a Secretariat member of PSF, to deliver the vote of thanks. Over to you, Rashmi.
A very good evening to one and all present here. I'm Rashmi Marwada, a student of Tata Institute of Social Sciences, currently pursuing my master's in law in access to justice. And I'm also the elected student union representative. I'm the vice president and also one of the secretariat members of Progressive Student Forum TISS. It was a wonderful lecture and really insightful. Sir Vijay Prashad has enlightened us with the true insights of what is happening in Gaza and how there have been a lot of silence from our government towards such issues, and also Sir has talked about the effect of it on the international scenario, international relations of countries. So overall, it was very insightful, and it was uh, I really lack the words to say to describe about the lecture, as it is said that every good things has to come to an end. So here I am to deliver the vote of thanks for this wonderful lecture. So first of all, I would like to thank our guest, Sir Vijay Prashad, for taking out his valuable time for us and delivering this lecture. Secondly, I would also like to thank our technical team, Comrade Fatima and Comrade Shreyas, for handling the technical side, for uh, ensuring that the lecture happens in a smooth manner. And other than this, I would also like to thank Comrade Ramdas for being an amazing chair, and also the wonderful attendees out there for being an amazing audience and posing your questions and making this interaction actually very, very successful. So uh, with this, I would like to officially conclude. But before concluding, I would like to inform our attendees that you can follow the social media platforms of Progressive Student Forum TISS in order to stay updated about our activities and all the works we do. So with this, I would like to I would officially conclude this lecture. A very big thank you to everyone from the bottom of my heart for making this lecture a successful one. Thank you so much, everyone, and have a great day ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Rashmi.
Bye. Thanks a lot.